En esta sesión a los siguientes oradores. Señor Anthony Banbury, representante especial del Secretario General y jefe de la misión de las Naciones Unidas para la respuesta de emergencia al Ébola. Señor Hervé Latsous, secretario general adjunto de Operaciones de Mantenimiento de la Paz. Y señor Tayeb Brook Serihun, secretario general de Asuntos Políticos. Así queda acordado. En nombre del Consejo, doy la bienvenida al señor Banbury, quien participa en la sesión de hoy por videoconferencia desde Accra. El Consejo de Seguridad iniciará ahora el examen del tema 2 del orden del día. Diciéndole buenas tardes, doy la palabra ahora al señor Anthony Banbury.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you for the opportunity to provide you with an overview of operational developments related to the Ebola crisis and of the establishment of the first ever United Nations system-wide mission and the first ever emergency health mission, the United Nations Mission for Ebola Emergency Response, UNMIR. UNMIR is a unique mission designed to confront an unprecedented, deadly, and growing crisis. Since the Secretary General announced the creation of the Global Ebola Response Coalition on 1 September, a number of important steps have been taken to accelerate the response to the Ebola crisis and to galvanize the international community, among them the establishment of UNMIR on September 19. I am inspired by the leadership of President Alpha Condé of Guinea, of President Bai Koroma of Sierra Leone, and of President Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia. I am humbled by the hard work and dedication of national and international personnel fighting Ebola on the front lines as healthcare workers, members of burial teams, contact tracers, logisticians, and much more. I am grateful for the commitments by member states of their civilian and military personnel, of material and of money, but I am deeply, deeply worried that all of this combined is not nearly enough to stop Ebola. Ebola got a head start on us. It is far ahead of us, it is running faster than us, and it is winning the race. We cannot let Ebola win. For if Ebola wins, we, the people of the United Nations, lose so very much. We lose things that we cannot lose. We cannot let that happen. The World Health Organization advises that the 4 things we collectively must do to stop the Ebola virus are to identify and trace contacts, manage cases, ensure safe burials, and provide people with information they can use to protect themselves. Each of these is critical and each involves complex operations on the ground. If we fail at any of these, we fail entirely. WHO also advises that within 60 days, we must ensure that 70% of infected people are in a care facility and 70% of burials are done without causing further infection. We need to do that within 60 days from October 1. If we reach these targets, then we can turn this epidemic around. The excruciating challenge is that with each passing day, as more people are infected, as the number of people infected grows exponentially, the absolute value of these targets grows rapidly, and those targets become more distant and more difficult to achieve. If we do not reach these targets within 60 days, and the numbers spike, many more people will die. This is what we are fighting for now. We are fighting to prevent unavoidable deaths. We are fighting for people who are alive and healthy today, but will become infected by Ebola and die if we do not put in place the necessary emergency response. This is the entire focus of everyone in UNMIR. Our plan to stop the crisis, to do the 4 things mentioned above that WHO says we must do, is the right plan for the current crisis. But if we do not get ahead of the crisis, if we do not reach our targets, and the number of people with Ebola rises dramatically, as some have predicted, the plan we have is not scalable to the size of such a new crisis. We either stop Ebola now, or we face an entirely unprecedented situation for which we do not have a plan. To illustrate this challenge, we can look at the expected number of new Ebola infections per week at the 60-day mark, December 1. My colleague, Dr. Bruce Aylward of WHO and UNMIR, stated today that we can expect a new caseload of approximately 10,000 people per week by 1 December. This means that we need 7,000 beds for treatment. Under current planning and projections, we expect to have approximately 4,300 beds in Ebola treatment centers by that date. However, many of those beds have no staff to operate them under current plans. To make up for the gap in beds, we must build about 2,700 beds in community care centers, or about 300 such centers. We will also need staff to manage the facilities and care for those people in the beds. And those staff need to be trained so they themselves do not fall sick, and they need to be paid and properly equipped. These projected numbers also assume that all the facilities and beds will be used to maximum efficiency with no beds left unfilled regardless of the geographical location of the facility. The disease is spreading most rapidly in urban concentrations. Over half of the new cases will be in one urban center alone. We will need to provide tailored special assistance to the urban settings. The same expansion of activity to achieve the same intended effect is true for all the other interventions that are necessary to turn the epidemic around. For example, we estimate that we need approximately 15 more diagnostic laboratories capable of processing 100 samples per day each. And we need to go from about 50 burial teams to about 500. And we need to equip those teams with about 1,000 vehicles. And the workers the workers in the burial teams need to be given protective suits and chlorine sprayers. They need to be trained and paid. And we need to do all of this before December 1st. With every day that passes, the number of sick people increases, creating the need for this greater response. As time passes, we need to do more contact tracing, and that means more trained staff with more motorcycles and more cell phones. Time passing means a more robust supply chain. It means more transportation assets. It means more UN, international, and national staff. It means more medical support to the staff and security arrangements for them. It means more partners on the ground. It means more generators and laptops and bandwidth. It especially means more money. And it means many, many more things. And it means more complex crisis management. Time is our biggest enemy. We must use every moment of every day to our advantage. And that is what UNMIR is doing. Since its establishment by the Secretary General 25 days ago, UNMIR has set up a headquarters in Accra, Ghana, and deployed an operational presence to the 3 most affected countries. We have deployed a total of 84 international staff, including personnel from WHO, WFP, UNICEF, OCHA, UNDP, DFS, DPA, DPKO, DPI, DSS, the EOSG, the Regional Service Center in Entebbe, 8 field missions, and the U.S. Center for Disease Control. And soon we will have an expert from the Chinese Center for Disease Control. We also have liaison officers from the United Kingdom, the United States, and Germany. We have deployed a plane and 5 helicopters. We have deployed 69 vehicles, and 140 more are coming soon. We have put in place robust telecommunications and internet links. and we have done all the above in record time. Never before have I seen the United Nations, so many of its parts, move so fast in such a unified manner. The Secretary General has given clear instructions. Move fast. Do not let discussion and red tape slow us down. I am grateful to the heads of UN departments and agencies who have embraced this approach. The United Nations system is throwing all its might and capability into the fight against Ebola. We have been empowered by the Secretary General with special authorities to hire staff quickly, to transfer assets, to purchase materials, to take action in the best interest of the organization and furtherance of our commitment to bring the Ebola crisis to a conclusion. More broadly, UNMIR is playing the critical role of crisis manager. Much good and brave work has been done by national governments, UN agencies, NGOs, civil society actors, and others these past few months. But responding to a complex crisis, especially one that cuts across multiple national boundaries and is as difficult and fraught with risk as this one, requires an overall perspective and it requires a comprehensive operational plan. UNMIR is working with partners to put in place such a plan that sets clear objectives, identifies all the lines of activity necessary to achieve those objectives, assigns responsibility for each activity, and puts in place metrics and reporting systems to measure performance. The operational plan will ensure no gaps are left unfilled and that scarce resources are efficiently allocated to the highest priority requirements. This plan will be in support of national efforts and will show the national authorities what support they can expect from the United Nations and when. The national governments will always retain ownership of the Ebola response in their country. This planning process is operationally and organizationally complex due to the multiplicity of actors. For example, something seemingly so simple as community care centers needs detailed planning. I mentioned earlier we need to build about 300 of them. Who will speak to the community about Ebola and about putting a care center in their community? Who will build the center? Who will staff it and who will train the staff? And who will pay the staff? How will they be paid? Where will the money come from? What supplies will the center require? How often will they need to be resupplied? Who will deliver the supplies and how? How will the hazardous waste be disposed of and who will do that? What will be the source of the clean water that's necessary for washing? Who will test the patients in the center for Ebola? How far away will the testing laboratories be? How will the samples be transported? Etc., etc., etc. Community care centers are just one issue that needs such detailed planning and commitment by partners. For each major line of activity within an Ebola response plan, there are an equal number of vital actions that need to be properly addressed. The operational response is especially challenging because we need to put all elements of the response together correctly everywhere. The contact identification and tracing, the case management, the safe burials, and the community engagement all need to be done properly wherever Ebola is. And Ebola is spread across a very broad geographical area. If we fail in any one area, then the microscopic virus will find that chink in our armor and continue to spread. And as long as there is a single case of Ebola anywhere in any of these 3 countries, then the deadly virus is a threat to all countries and all peoples. The best way, the very best way to protect the people of non-infected countries is by helping the people of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone to stop Ebola now where it is. As recent events have shown, though, Ebola represents a risk today to people in non-affected countries. It is urgent and essential that all countries, especially those identified by the WHO as highest priority and high priority, take immediate steps to prevent the spread of Ebola to their country and steps to prepare themselves to act quickly in the event of a local case to prevent further spread. UNMIR will support WHO and national efforts at prevention and preparedness where appropriate. We will also put in place a rapid response capability with reserve stocks of equipment and materiel and pre-identified medical personnel and transportation assets to move quickly to the site of an outbreak if so requested by national authorities. But these efforts must be bolstered by bilateral assistance. Madam President, today the United Nations lost a member of our family when a United Nations volunteer working in UNMIL died of Ebola. He is the second UN staff member to have died from the disease. I am very grateful to the medical team in Germany who worked so valiantly to try and save his life. We all mourn his passing and the passing of his colleague. I pay tribute to the dedication and commitment of the members of the UN country teams and UNMIL who have been working on the front lines of the fight against this disease from the beginning. And I'm deeply grateful to the UN personnel who are literally flocking to UNMIR to join this fight. We all owe a debt of gratitude to the national and international personnel on whose bravery and skills we now collectively depend. We also owe it to the national personnel that they get paid a decent wage for the work they are doing and that they get paid on time. And the world must not punish its own first responders by stigmatization based on hysteria and a misunderstanding of the facts of Ebola. Madam President, there is much bad news about Ebola. The good news is that we know how to stop it. We know what needs to be done, and we can do it. But UNMIR cannot do it alone. The affected countries cannot do it alone. Even the combination of all the actors now on the ground, national and international, UN, bilateral, and NGO, cannot stop Ebola by themselves. We need more NGOs to send trained Ebola treatment unit managers and health workers. We need more governments to build and operate Ebola treatment units and diagnostic laboratories. We need more foreign medical teams. We need logistics and transport support. And we need money to pay for the rapid acceleration of the operational response. We especially need, and we owe it to the personnel working on the front lines, reliable, high-quality medical care for any person engaged in the Ebola response, including medical evacuation where appropriate. And we need all of that urgently, urgently. The penalty for delay is enormous. The penalty for failure is inconceivable and unacceptable. We must act now. We must act together. We must defeat Ebola, and we must do it fast. Thank you.
Doy las gracias al señor Banbury por la información que ha proporcionado. Doy la palabra ahora al señor Hervé Latsous.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, et merci, je crois, pour cette opportunité de discuter de ce qui peut être une conséquence de cette crise épidémiologique majeure, à savoir le risque d'une remise en cause de tous ces acquis qui sont le fruit de longues années de travail des Nations Unies et des 3 missions de maintien de la paix que nous avons en Afrique de l'Ouest. Car pour le moment, c'est le Libéria, mais nous devons être très attentifs également à ce qui se passe, ce qui pourrait se passer en Côte d'Ivoire, voire qu'à Dieu ne plaise au Mali. Pour l'heure, je concentrerai mon propos sur le Libéria, où effectivement il se déroule une tragédie humaine d'une ampleur sans précédent. Et en même temps, le Libéria, c'est un pays dans lequel nous avons déployé il y a 11 ans une opération de maintien de la paix qui, je crois que nous pouvons le dire, malgré certaines fragilités, a accompli de vrais progrès sur la voie de la paix et de la stabilité. Et c'est l'occasion de remercier tous nos personnels pour leur dévouement. Souvenons-nous de l'histoire. Un siècle d'exclusion systémique, des décennies de dysfonctionnalité, 14 années de guerres civiles successives, plus brutales les unes que les autres. Et pourtant, aujourd'hui, il y a des gains. des gains fragiles, je l'ai dit, mais quand même important. Le retour à l'ordre constitutionnel en 2006, l'expansion modérée mais significative de l'économie, l'accès des populations aux services de base les plus élémentaires. On peut dire que le Libéria était et sur la route de la transformation. Et c'est là qu'effectivement la crise d'Ebola change la perspective, parce que toute une série de phénomènes se développent, dont j'ai été le témoin lorsque je m'y suis rendu il y a un mois pour inspecter notre mission et voir quels étaient les problèmes. D'abord, des divisions politiques et sociales qui s'approfondissent, un système public de santé qui est quasiment en implosion, une économie qui s'arrête parce qu'il n'y a presque plus d'avions civils, parce qu'il y a de moins en moins de navires qui font escale à Monrovia, parce qu'un certain nombre de concessions forestières, minières s'arrêtent ou ont cessé parce que leurs propriétaires ont décidé d'aller s'installer à l'étranger pendant la durée de la crise. Tout ceci fait que les perspectives et donc tout ce qui en découle pour les groupes de population les plus vulnérables, tout cela s'aggrave. Alors, nous étions sur un agenda que ce Conseil avait fixé en 2012 encore, faire avancer les réformes politiques, faire avancer la réconciliation nationale, tout cela pour faire en sorte qu'un pays encore divisé élargisse progressivement son espace politique, qu'il y ait de meilleures perceptions du gouvernement, que la construction de l'État se développe, tout ceci conformément aux souhaits des citoyens. Et en fait, je crois que cette crise nous rappelle à quel point ces tâches sont essentielles, parce qu'elles sont en cours, mais elles ne sont pas menées à bien encore. On pourrait imaginer qu'une crise d'une telle ampleur serve de facteur fédérateur, à la condition qu'évidemment une communication intensive, des processus de décision transparents, une allocation des ressources qui soit également transparente, à la condition que tous ces facteurs soient réunis. Mais malheureusement, il faut bien le constater, il subsiste, voire s'aggrave, une méfiance importante de la population vis-à-vis des institutions nationales. Des questions ont été soulevées sur le leadership et sont illustrées par divers changements, voire des démissions au sein des équipes gouvernementales. Et puis, nous le voyons dans les médias, il y a nécessité d'un engagement beaucoup plus marqué du gouvernement vis-à-vis de ces travailleurs de santé, dont certains sont en grève, dont beaucoup, heureusement, font leur travail avec courage, avec détermination, mais dans des conditions dont vraiment il faut prendre toute la mesure. Plus généralement, c'est un système de santé complet qui s'effondre. Nous avons des femmes qui meurent en couche parce qu'elles n'ont pas de soins. Nous avons des gens qui meurent de la malaria parce qu'ils ne bénéficient pas de soins. Nous avons des enfants qui sont en risque de maladies guérissables puisque toutes les campagnes de vaccination ont été suspendues. C'est donc une crise très large qui s'est développée au Libéria et les conséquences en sont difficiles à mesurer. Ce qui est vrai également, c'est que la crise d'Ebola a déclenché des tensions politiques considérables et une certaine incertitude. Aujourd'hui, vous le savez, aurait dû être le jour des élections, le 14 octobre. Mais clairement, ce n'était pas une option que de mener à bien cette consultation. La décision a été prise donc de les renvoyer. Et même ainsi, il y a un débat au Libéria sur la nature de l'organe politique ou juridique qui est en mesure de prendre cette décision. Pour la MINUL, l'important, c'est de continuer à pousser les leaders, les personnalités politiques, à trouver un moyen de se mettre d'accord pour avancer, pour protéger la santé publique et pour permettre aussi au pouvoir législatif de continuer à fonctionner. Vous le savez, la présidente Johnson Sirleaf a demandé récemment à la législature d'étendre ses pouvoirs dans un régime d'exception. qui avait été introduit dès le mois d'août. Elle a également cherché le moyen de faire en sorte que l'État prenne en charge les biens privés et voire en restreigne l'usage dans l'intérêt de la sécurité et de la santé du public. Là non plus, il n'y a pas d'accord au sein de la législature pour savoir s'il faut ou non donner ces pouvoirs extraordinaires à l'exécutif. Pour la MINUL, ce qui est important, c'est d'abord le respect de l'état de droit, le respect des droits des citoyens. Ce qui nous amène à examiner de très près les changements envisagés, les restrictions qui pourraient être introduites, de telle manière que rien de tout cela n'aille au-delà de ce qui est dicté par l'urgence. Donc, c'est un engagement de tous les instants avec les parties prenantes libérianes, avec chaque fois l'objectif d'essayer de trouver un consensus et un accord de tous pour que la gouvernance soit efficace, qu'elle puisse rendre des comptes, qu'elle soit transparente et qu'en même temps la population soit protégée d'une expansion supplémentaire d'Ebola. Pour le moment, sur le plan sécuritaire, heureusement, il n'y a pas eu de détérioration perceptible. Il y avait eu des tensions au mois de juillet, au mois d'août. Il y a eu notamment cet incident rapporté par les médias à West Point avec la mort d'un adolescent de 15 ans blessé par des soldats de l'armée libériane. Bon, depuis lors, la situation s'est quelque peu améliorée et il faut évidemment quand même suivre tout cela de très près parce que le mécontentement du public demeure élevé et tout mécontentement du public partout, c'est une cause potentielle, un facteur de risque pour la sécurité. Nous travaillons donc très étroitement avec les institutions de sécurité du Libéria pour planifier des opérations sécuritaires qui pourraient être rendues nécessaires par le contexte de l'urgence. L'armée, vous le savez, a été dispensée, éloignée des tâches de sécurité intérieure. Elle concentre ses efforts sur la construction d'infrastructures humanitaires et sur la sécurisation des frontières toujours très poreuses du Libéria. Je voudrais ajouter un mot sur la situation au Libéria, Madame la Présidente, sur les conséquences humaines de tout cela. Lorsque j'ai été à Monrovia, il y a un mois, j'ai été frappé par le fait qu'on ne se touche plus, on ne se serre pas la main, on se fait un signe comme ça à distance au mieux, et c'est tout. Et cela dans une société qui est une société compliquée, une société qui a souffert, qui reste profondément divisée, et où pourtant il y a un affectif, il y a même du tactile. Les gens traditionnellement se touchent, s'embrassent, se serrent la main. Eh bien, il n'y a plus rien de tout cela, et je crois que c'est quelque chose qui marque aussi, qui doit interpeller parce que, au fond, les rites, les derniers rites, lorsqu'une personne décède, c'est quelque chose de majeur dans ces sociétés et que là, les circonstances font que même quand on aime quelqu'un, on ne peut pas lui témoigner son amour, son affection, sa proximité. Et je crois que c'est quelque chose qui est extrêmement douloureux. Alors, j'en viens maintenant à la MINUL, Madame la Présidente. Jusqu'à présent, aucun personnel des Nations Unies n'avait été infecté. Et puis, malgré toute notre vigilance, à la fin du mois de septembre, ce fut d'abord un membre national, un membre libérian du personnel de la MINUL qui est mort, et très probablement d'Ebola, encore qu'on n'en soit jamais totalement sûr. Et la nuit dernière, vous le savez, c'est un agent international de la MINUL qui est mort en Allemagne après avoir fait l'objet d'un diagnostic et avoir été évacué en Europe le 8 octobre. Du coup, nous avons 39 autres agents de la MINUL, dont la moitié environ de personnel militaire, qui sont en quarantaine ou surveillés de près. Je crois que ce qu'il faut bien réaliser, et c'était pour ça que je m'étais rendu à Monrovia, c'est que nos missions, elles comprennent des hommes et des femmes qui ont des familles, qui ont des gens qu'ils aiment, qui les aiment, et qui ont l'attente légitime de pouvoir rentrer chez eux une fois leur mission accomplie. Il faut donc continuer à faire tout ce que nous pouvons pour les aider à remplir leur rôle, à faire en sorte que la mission puisse remplir le rôle, encore une fois, de préservation de la paix et de la stabilité qui est le sien. Voilà, c'est un travail compliqué. Il doit y avoir le maximum de garanties offertes, notamment en termes de traitement dans le pays et d'évacuation si nécessaire. Et évidemment, c'est un point sur lequel nous souhaitons recueillir le maximum de soutien de votre part, mesdames et messieurs les membres du Conseil de sécurité, mais aussi de l'ensemble des pays de la communauté internationale. Un mot pour terminer sur la situation en Côte d'Ivoire et au Mali. Heureusement, à ce stade, aucun cas n'a été rapporté ni dans l'un ni dans l'autre pays. Et les deux gouvernements ont pris des mesures extrêmement fortes pour faire en sorte que Ebola ne se répande pas dans leur territoire, ou si cela devait malgré tout se produire, pour s'y préparer. Il faut d'ailleurs noter que ces deux pays, la Côte d'Ivoire et le Mali, ont des systèmes de santé qui sont sensiblement beaucoup plus développés que ceux de la plupart de leurs voisins. Donc il y a eu, de la part de nos missions également, de l'ONUCI, de la MINUSMA, un travail très approfondi pour se préparer à toute possible apparition de l'épidémie, avec des plans d'urgence, des plans opérationnels avec différents scénarios, et puis des plans destinés à assurer la continuité de ces missions s'il devait malgré tout y avoir un accident. Ils ont mis en place des plans pour des facilités d'isolement médical, de traitement, et tout ceci avec le soutien de l'UNMER et celui d'autres acteurs. L'UNMER avec laquelle d'ailleurs la coopération est, je crois, excellente. Donc j'en terminerai, Madame la Présidente, en exprimant ma gratitude vraiment du fond du cœur à tous nos personnels qui, dans des conditions dramatiques, des conditions de danger, dont nous mesurons tous les enjeux, font leur travail malgré tout, avec courage, avec détermination. Et je crois qu'en exprimant ma tristesse pour toutes les victimes, y compris la victime que nous avons déplorée nous-mêmes la nuit dernière, je crois que nous leur devons à tous l'assurance que les Nations Unies font tout ce qu'elles peuvent dans cet effort collaboratif pour essayer d'éviter que les choses s'aggravent encore davantage. Je vous remercie.
Doy las gracias al señor Latsus por la información que ha proporcionado. Doy la palabra ahora al señor Tayeb Brook Serihun. Tiene la palabra.
Madam President, members of the Security Council, as the Ebola outbreak enters its 42nd week, there is growing concern about its impact on peace and security, not only in the affected countries, but also in the wider West Africa region. The outbreak has hampered the efforts of regional groupings in implementing cross-border security strategies and in taking steps to strengthen regional economic and monetary integration. Nationally, it has delayed progress in a number of key electoral and constitutional review processes. At the local level, weak government structures and mistrust between communities and authorities have led to violent incidents, resulting in a number of fatalities. As some have correctly observed, in a sub-region emerging from protracted conflict, the danger Ebola poses towards social unrest and violence is ever present. Moreover, far-fetched or not, some in the counter-terrorism field have begun to mention Ebola and terrorism in the same sentence. In the three most affected countries, Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, the implementation of critical government programs have slowed considerably as national authorities have been forced to refocus their energies and resources on stopping, treating, and preventing the spread of the Ebola outbreak. The role of governments has also been impacted as some elected officials and civil servants have become victims to the disease. Ebola is significantly disrupting the economic sustainability of these countries with dire consequences for the delivery of essential state services. As work disruptions continue in construction, in mining, in manufacturing, in tourism and transportation sectors due to the concerns over the spread of the disease, the effect on the economies and the development prospects of the affected countries can be devastating and destabilizing. There are also concerns about the continuity of critical projects focused on building peace and ensuring sustainable stability in the three countries. Moreover, the adverse consequences of isolation and stigmatization on peace and security in the affected countries should not be underestimated. In Sierra Leone, in the face of the outbreak, political parties have been relatively unified in efforts to fight the disease, making appearances on national television and radio in support of sensitization efforts. However, consultations on the constitution review process have been delayed. It remains to be seen whether the referendum, which is expected to take place before the next elections, will be impacted. In Liberia, the political challenges arising from the Ebola outbreak are daunting. In the past few months, the constitutional review process was temporarily suspended due to the ongoing state of emergency, and senatorial elections scheduled for October may be postponed. These delays, coupled with the preparations for the next general elections in 2017, will significantly stretch the capacity and resources of the National Elections Commission and could compromise the integrity of the electoral processes, raise tensions, and even threaten political stability. In Guinea, little progress has been made in the last few months in preparing for municipal elections anticipated to take place this year. Major political activities of the ruling and opposition parties have slowed as both sides continue to focus efforts on fighting the outbreak. This has also delayed crucial efforts to bridge the political divide between the government and opposition parties. Madam President, the security situation in the three most affected countries has also been significantly impacted since the outbreak of the disease. The governments of the three affected countries have declared states of emergency, passed restrictive laws, or taken measures aimed at restricting the spread of the disease. They have also imposed curfews, cordoned off and quarantined communities, and robustly deployed security forces with the objective of enforcing Ebola response measures to protect health workers, quarantine facilities, and maintain public order. The states of emergency were also temporarily accompanied by the closure of schools and restrictions on public meetings and gatherings. Since the outbreak of the disease, there have been incidents of violence perpetrated against health workers and public officials. We have also witnessed community riots fueled by mistrust and ignorance of or misinformation about the disease, as well as threats of strike action by health workers and burial teams. In southeastern Guinea, the security situation remains tense in the regional capital of Nzerekore, following last month's murder of a team of Guinean health and government officials in the nearby town of Wome, who had been distributing information about the outbreak. There have also been riots in Nzerekore itself, following rumors that people were being contaminated by health workers trying to decontaminate a market area. Since February, treatment centers and health workers have also been sporadically attacked by communities accusing medical workers of bringing the virus to the region. In Sierra Leone, lack of information about the medical facts of the disease has fueled resentment, leading to low-level public disturbances, attacks on the police, and attempts to vandalize treatment centers in Freetown. In Liberia, attacks on security forces, looting of clinics, and the deployment of riot police to quell demonstrations by angry crowds have also been witnessed. Over the past weekend, Liberian nurses have also threatened strike action. These actions and reactions have heightened political tension and have the potential to deteriorate to violence and undermine public security and safety. Madam President, the Ebola outbreak has isolated Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone from the wider region. Except for Mali, all neighbors have closed their common land borders and are maintaining restrictions on incoming flights from the three affected countries. The isolation is projected to have grave economic consequences for the three countries and for the sub-region. The World Bank has assessed that economic growth rates in the three countries would decline by the end of this year, and that the region could face a substantial loss of GDP output by the end of 2015, depending on the spread of the virus. This will undoubtedly have a detrimental impact on struggling populations, on domestic politics, and critically on stability. The longer the Ebola outbreak continues, the more it threatens to tear at the country's social fabric, arouse political divisions, and threaten to unravel hard-won gains in democratic practice and in good governance. There have been encouraging engagement of regional peace and security mechanisms in efforts against the outbreak and to help mitigate its adverse consequences. The recent decision of the AU Peace and Security Council to authorize the deployment of an AU military and civilian humanitarian mission was an important contribution. The African Union decision involves the deployment of medical, paramedical, and military personnel to the affected countries, working in partnership with the United Nations system to enhance the international community's response to the disease and its potential consequences to political stability and the peace and security of the affected countries and the sub-region. On their part, the heads of state of government and government of the Economic Community West African states have directed the Commission, in liaison with the West Africa Health Organization, to adopt a regional approach towards containing and managing the Ebola outbreak, and requested the Commission to mobilize armed and security forces to strengthen the regional response against the disease. The Manu River Union is also working towards ensuring a regional, coherent approach in tackling Ebola. The MRU is working with the United Nations and other partners to develop field activities in response to Ebola as part of its strategy for cross-border security in the sub-region. This will include increased support for MRU, joint border security and confidence building units in border communities between the three affected countries. Madam President, the outbreak of Ebola has exacerbated the peace and security challenges faced by national institutions and governments in the West Africa region. As we have seen in the cases of Nigeria and Senegal, swift and effective action by national authorities has succeeded in containing the spread of the virus. The international community must continue to provide support to the sub-region and affected countries in their efforts to effectively stop, treat, and prevent a looming pandemic to ensure that the hard-won peace and security gains made in the sub-region are protected and preserved. I thank you.
Doy las gracias al señor Serihun por la información que ha proporcionado. Doy ahora la palabra al representante de Sierra Leona.
Madam President, let me thank the Council for giving us this opportunity to once again reiterate the need for urgent action in our response to the Ebola virus disease. Sierra Leone welcomes the effort of this Council and the General Assembly for the swift action, the move from formal and informal deliberations to unprecedented resolutions in the response of this House. Our gratitude also goes to USG Bamburi, USG Hervé Lassou, Dr. Nabarro, Dr. Fukuda, Dr. Margaret Chan, and all those UN officials who continue day in and day out to battle at the forefront of this disease. Madam President, it is evident to all of us now that what we face is a global situation, a global calamity, if you will. What started off as a medical emergency has now metasized into an economic, a security, and a truly frightening scourge that we all must address. We are grateful for the efforts that have been made today to set up the mission. We urge that the mission and all those who are involved in its planning ensure that its vital work of coordination and collaboration be done swiftly as possible. The establishment and the deployment of staff, essential supplies, logistical chains must be established as swiftly as possible. Our gratitude goes to all the members of this Council who, in their various ways, have contributed logistics, personnel, ideas, and other support to meet this scourge. Now more than ever, we must live up to the promise of this organization and act truly as one and act truly united. Sierra Leone, Guinea, Liberia find themselves at the epicenter of this scourge, and despite their best efforts, the best efforts of their public health systems, the best efforts of their public administrations and governments, they have been overwhelmed. We look to the outside world, to this community of nations to help. Some may say that the call or the response was delayed, but now is not the time for us to look back. Now is not the time for an audit of what has been done individually, regionally, or nationally. Now is the time for increased and deepening action. All those who have contributed and have done what they could, we are grateful. But we do ask for those who can do more to do more. All of those who have pledged contributions, we ask that they turn these pledges swiftly into contributions. Now more than ever, is it the time for us to make the transition, accelerate the transition from resolution to action. On the ground, the numbers are truly horrifying. The number of infected cases, the number of deaths, the number of misery, all task our collective imaginations and all task our collective efforts. Now, however, is not the time for us to retreat into fear, born by ignorance, but to move to action, born by knowledge. The greater media presence that this scourge takes, the greater that it appears that medical fiction seems to take over from medical fact. Let us be guided by the best medical minds and the best medical advice that we can rely on. Let us not give in to ignorance or fear or emotion that paralyzes us into inaction. Madam President, a Sudanese UN official has recently passed away in Leipzig, despite the best efforts to airlift him, medevac him, and give him the best treatment available. We have seen that countries with the strongest, or perhaps stronger public health systems are also being challenged. There's a nurse in Dallas, Texas, who is under isolation. There is a Liberian gentleman, Tim Eric Duncan, who has passed away. There's a Spanish priest. There's a Spanish nurse who also have respectively fallen victim to this scourge and also are under quarantine. We are not to fear Ebola because Ebola can be defeated. The best medical protocols, the best medical minds tell us so. What simply needs to be done is to identify, contain, control, and eradicate. For this, supplies, logistics, human resources must go to the places where they're most needed. We're grateful to those on the front line who, day in and day out, hour after hour, risk making the ultimate sacrifice to act in the finest tradition of the medical profession to help others. The mission that has been deployed, the first of its kind, is indeed best described as a public health mission. It is not a special political mission. It's not a transitional administration. It is not a classic peacekeeping mission. It's quite simply a mission designed to save lives. It is a mission of health keepers. As we express sympathies for the families of the deceased, let us also celebrate those who have survived. Let us also provide them with the relevant support so they can be reintegrated into the respective communities. And let us also explore the promise that their blood, the plasma in their blood, holds for others. Madam President, we as an organization, we as a community of nations, have to act in concert. Because quite simply, what perhaps 6 months ago was considered a West African problem is now truly a global problem. The trust fund that has been set up is woefully underfunded. Dr. Chan has also spoke about a 20-fold increase in support and resources that are needed. Those members of this chamber who have joined the fight, who have shown leadership, we ask that you continue to be resolute, and we ask that you continue to show leadership. What perhaps is most striking with this disease is that it strips the caregiver of that most basic power in which he or she has, the power of touch. It turns that very gift into a potential transmitter of the disease. It seeks to strip us of our basic humanity, the ability to care for one another, the ability for a mother to hug and comfort an ailing child, the ability for a father to hug and comfort a grandfather or a grandmother. As the affected countries, we not only face the grim reality of day-to-day survival, the grim reality of corpses not being able to be buried in time, of patients not being able to receive in time in treatment and isolation centers, we also face daily indignities or growing indignities, which perhaps I think this chamber should be aware of. The national football team of Sierra Leone recently went to meet another team to play a scheduled match. They were isolated in the area of the hotel where they occupied. The bus which took them to and from the field was the subject of insults. People crying, Ebola, Ebola, Ebola. Young children ran away from them, and they were treated in a manner that would task the resilience of the strongest of us all. We ask that we move and act, not out of discrimination, not out of ignorance, but out of fact and the need that we face a common threat. Extraordinary measures are called for, and Sierra Leone, through the leadership of Dr. Ernest Bai Krumah, recently instituted what has really been called a lockdown, a temporary shutdown, in order to educate and seek to establish the number of cases in the capital and beyond. This act, while criticized, while misunderstood by some, has shown to be a success and has been praised as such by qualified medical minds. We, together, as the three most affected countries, act in unison because we fully realize that eradicating Ebola in Liberia will not solve it in Guinea or solve it in Sierra Leone. Similarly, eradicating in Sierra Leone or taking action in Sierra Leone will not help Guinea or Liberia. We're grateful for the leadership shown by the Mano River Union under the chairmanship of President Alpha Conde and the Secretary General, Madame Daraba. We're grateful for the leadership shown by the African Union and other regional organizations, continental organizations who have all stepped into the fight. We're truly grateful for international organizations such as the EU, WHO, and all the members of the UN family who have joined the fight. But we do ask, most sincerely and most humbly, for a deepening of action, a deepening of support. We're grateful for the leadership shown to date, but leadership alone cannot win this fight. All of us, individually, collectively, regionally, and continentally, must do all we can to join the fight. What threatens a sub-region today or threatens a continent tomorrow has the possibility of engulfing the whole world. As the ambassadors of the three most affected states, Ebola is no longer an abstract issue. For all of us have relatives, family, and fellow citizens who face varying degrees of hardship, varying degrees of fear from this scourge. The President, in a recent televised statement to the World Bank, indicated the needs, the critical needs that are needed, that are required in Sierra Leone to fight this fight. We are in a position to provide details of those needs. The task plan devised in conjunction with WHO, with Margaret Chan and her team, devised in conjunction with the Mano River Union and the AU, is available and can be shared with all. But what we have learned is there's a deepening crisis. All that has been prepared over 3 months ago or 6 months ago is fast becoming irrelevant in terms of supplies, resources, and deployment of personnel. We have seen the World Bank indicate quite clearly the economic repercussions of Ebola, the impact it will have on the socio-economic development of these nations. Not long ago, we were gathered in this chamber to celebrate the transition of Sierra Leone from a post-conflict, from a in-conflict state to a post-conflict state, to celebrate its achievements, though fragile, but substantive. It's with a measure of sadness that we do appear here again for the second time to talk not of continued progress, but of a deepening crisis. Above all, what we require is a sense of hope, a sense that the United Nations and the community of nations that it represents will not abandon the fight, will not fail us, and will not relent until the scourge of Ebola has been removed. What emanated from West Africa has now become a cause for concern and worry in the United States, in Spain, in Europe, and other countries far beyond. We ask that all possible actions that have been considered be done from the basis of medical fact. Quarantines at airports or isolation of countries simply do not work. This is not what I believe. This is not what the three most affected nations believe. It is what the best medical minds tell us. There must be a dedicated air bridge in and out of the region to ensure that relevant supplies do go in. We therefore urge our neighbors, both near and far, to facilitate these efforts. We also are grateful to the private sector and also non-governmental organizations, the finest of which is MSF. What MSF has shown us is that we as nations, we as members of this United Nations must do more. Because if one national non-governmental organization can have done all that MSF has done, it puts us to shame if we cannot match their efforts and increase our participation. Madam President, as the representatives of the three most affected nations, it is our task to keep the momentum, the focus on this deadly scourge. But as I said before, the fight is not for us alone. The challenge is not for us alone. It is truly a global challenge. If I may just end with this thought, the depth of fear, the depth of emotion that has been expended to date concerning Ebola must be matched by the resolute will of all of us to beat the scourge and meet the challenge. Madam President, we are available as the three most affected countries to answer all questions, to answer all queries, to make all clarifications about the actions of our government. And we simply ask, in the reporting of what's been done on the ground and on the front line, that we are consulted and we are asked to state our views to avoid unnecessary panic, unnecessary misinformation, or misrepresentation of the true facts. Above all, what we do here and what we say here must make a difference for those who are on the front line. Promises of actions, pledges, contributions, financial or otherwise, must translate to effective and much needed supplies on the ground as soon as possible. I thank you, Madam President.
Doy las gracias al representante de Sierra Leona por su declaración. Doy la palabra ahora a la representante de Liberia.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity of participating in this briefing of the Council on the implications of the continuing spread of the Ebola virus disease on peace and security in the Mana River Basin. I would like to also thank the previous speakers, the head of UNMIR, Mr. Anthony Banbury. I don't know whether he can see us. Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, Mr. Hervé Latsus, and the ASG for Political Affairs, Mr. Tai Brook Zirahum, for their enlightening presentations and the insights which they have shared. Allow me to pay tribute to the fallen heroes, the medical and heroines, I should say, the medical staff, national and expatriate, like the UNMIL staff, and others who have died in the course of the Ebola response. Madam President, in the month of September alone, this august body was addressed on two separate occasions by the Minister of National Defense and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Liberia. They both outline in much detail the multidimensional impact of the disease on our country and its citizens, the erosion of the very fabric of the society, the assault on culture, the deepening of existing cleavages, loss of lives and livelihoods, the dwindling revenue, and the dire projections of economic growth. You know all of that. Initiatives taken, thankfully, by the Secretary General, this Council, and the General Assembly brought into sharp focus the urgency of international action. And we have indeed witnessed a higher level of engagement. The actions taken to rapidly establish the UN mission in Accra, UNMIR, is but one example. There are many others of people dipping into the pockets of actions that are being taken. While the situation on the ground is no doubt improving a little, we must be honest and admit that it has not changed substantially. Liberia, with a population of just 4 million, the smallest of the three most affected countries, is still leading in the rate of infections and deaths. So the spread of the disease continues to outpace the actions that we are taking. so we are not yet ahead of the curve. The government, with the support of UNMIL, the US military, and many other faithful partners, is racing against time to establish new isolation and treatment centers, community centers, which remain the single most critical need. Because if you cannot take in people who report the disease to you, you can do nothing. You can't do a contact tracing, you can't do a management of skills, you can't do anything until you have the facilities to bring people in when they report themselves, and that doesn't exist right now. Other needs include professional medical staff, medical supplies, including protective gear and equipment, as well as transport facilities. There are also important non-medical needs, such as upgrading the airport tarmac to receive all of these flights, augmenting storage facilities, and increasing food stocks. Liberia is immensely grateful for all of the expressions of solidarity, and they have taken different forms out of the media and all. And we are grateful for the very generous contributions and commitments made by member states. Our common challenge now is to urgently translate these commitments into tangible, impactful support on the ground. It's a common challenge. Madam President, as you are aware, Liberia was actively engaged in the implementation of a joint program with the Peace Building Commission when the Ebola virus struck. We were focused on strengthening the rule of law, as Mr. Latsus has mentioned, implementing measures for security sector reform, promoting national reconciliation, very much engaged in the constitutional review process, all in an effort to consolidate peace and reinforce a very fledgling democracy. Even the formula for responsible drawdown of UNMIL had been agreed and was under implementation. Youth unemployment and containing the spread of small arms and light weapons and transnational crime were challenges high on the national agenda. On all of these fronts, much progress had been registered, and Liberians had begun to enjoy some dividends of peace. The Ebola onslaught, because it's nothing less than that, the Ebola onslaught interrupted these activities, and it now presents some risks to the gains that we have made. The society has been placed under immense stress by this virus. Access to food is limited by high prices of local and imported goods. Livelihoods are lost or threatened. The movement of and interaction among people are restricted, of necessity, I should say. A state of emergency, the closure of educational facilities, extended leave for non-essential civil servants, all of these remain in place. Senatorial elections, as has been mentioned, scheduled for this very month, had to be postponed to next year. Paltry resources already reallocated to Ebola, almost exclusively, are still inadequate to address the demands of health workers threatening strike action. So I hope that I have provided additional insights, additional to what both ASG Zerahun and Mr. Latsus have said. Additional insights into a set of circumstances full of triggers for conflict. Injected into an already fragile post-conflict country, it can be a recipe for disaster, or it can be the fuse that ignites the international community to do even more. In the spirit of my president's statement to the World Bank last week, Liberia urges that all efforts be made to contain the disease through a more timely and decisive response. This means the construction of treatment and testing centers which are fully staffed and functional within a short period, and identification of burial sites. This also means improving and strengthening the regular healthcare system, because many deaths are resulting from the lack of access to health facilities to treat routine illnesses. Concurrently, we must remain mindful of the imperative of mitigating the economic consequences of the Ebola crisis, which have caused a shifting of resources from ongoing development activities under our agenda of transformation. This will require support to stimulate our productive sectors, particularly agriculture, and enable our people to resume self-sustaining livelihood endeavors. Because the more they remain idle, the more the prospects for trouble. As we have heard in many fora, especially from the Deputy Secretary General, peace, development, and human rights are intertwined. We must protect the gains made in Liberia on all these fronts, to which this Council has contributed immensely. And we must support and protect those on the front lines. We should also continue to bring all of our energies to bear in the response at the national level and with our regional and global partnerships. Madam President, Liberia looks to the future with some optimism. I would say guarded optimism, inspired by the resilience of its people and the heartwarming demonstration by you, the international community, of care and the belief in our common humanity. I thank you.
Doy las gracias a la representante de Liberia por su declaración. Doy la palabra ahora al representante de Guinea.
Madame la Présidente, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du Conseil de sécurité, ma délégation vous remercie de votre initiative d'organiser la présente réunion qui est indicative de votre volonté à tous de contribuer à mobiliser la communauté internationale en vue d'une riposte globale et urgente contre la fièvre hémorragique à virus Ebola. Je voudrais également remercier M. Bambari, représentant spécial du secrétaire général, M. Latsous, secrétaire général adjoint, et M. Taye Zerioun, sous-secrétaire général, pour les informations pertinentes qu'ils viennent de partager avec nous et qui confirment l'ampleur et la complexité de la crise sanitaire et socio-économique qui menace la paix et la sécurité dans les pays affectés. En effet, depuis la réunion du 18 septembre 2014 du Conseil de sécurité, qui a reconnu l'épidémie Ebola comme une menace à la paix et à la sécurité internationale, beaucoup de rencontres ont été organisées, notamment la réunion de haut niveau du secrétaire général sur Ebola, la réunion de l'Assemblée générale qui a approuvé à l'unanimité l'initiative du secrétaire général relative au déploiement de la mission des Nations Unies pour l'action d'urgence contre Ebola et tant d'autres. Mon pays se félicite également de nombreuses annonces d'assistance et des interventions sur le terrain par les partenaires bilatéraux et multilatéraux en vue d'identifier les meilleures stratégies permettant de stopper très rapidement la propagation fulgurante de la maladie. Cependant, force est de constater que le nombre de victimes continue de s'accroître de façon inquiétante. Les conséquences économiques, sociales et humanitaires s'intensifient, avec pour corollaire une psychose généralisée au sein des populations des pays touchés et au-delà de leurs frontières. Au-delà des pertes en vies humaines et de la dislocation sociale, nous risquons d'assister à un effondrement de nos économies pendant plusieurs années, parce que l'épidémie affecte tous les aspects de la vie des populations, les services de santé, la production, la vente, l'exportation des produits alimentaires de base. Madame la Présidente, la propagation exponentielle de l'épidémie, ajoutée à la faiblesse du système sanitaire et à l'insuffisance des moyens, n'ont pas permis à nos États de répondre efficacement aux défis de l'épidémie. Ce décalage entre les attentes des populations et les capacités réelles des États à les protéger et à combattre la maladie a créé une crise de confiance et de la méfiance entre les autorités et les citoyens en Guinée, ce qui a contribué à la panique et au mouvement incontrôlé qui favorise l'aggravation de la transmission du virus. N'étant pas bien informées, les populations continuent d'adopter des comportements inappropriés, voire dangereux, tels que le déni de l'existence même de la maladie, accusant parfois le gouvernement de violation des normes culturelles et de vouloir procéder à des épurations ethniques. Ces comportements et ces perceptions mettent en danger la stabilité de nos pays, surtout à l'approche des prochaines échéances électorales. Les grandes tensions politiques sont à craindre. Pour répondre avec efficacité aux besoins les plus pressants des pays affectés, le gouvernement guinéen exhorte la communauté internationale à intervenir conformément aux priorités ci-après. Premièrement, une riposte globale et urgente. Plus tôt la communauté internationale agira, mieux nous réussirons à vaincre cette épidémie qui pourrait s'étendre rapidement à d'autres pays africains et au-delà du continent. C'est pourquoi mon gouvernement plaide pour une assistance forte et rapide. Pour sa part, il s'est engagé à alléger les procédures administratives en vue d'accélérer l'acheminement et la distribution de l'aide et surtout d'y assurer la transparence totale. Face à la propagation continue du virus, telle que décrite par les institutions sanitaires comme l'OMS et le CDC, ainsi que plusieurs intervenants cet après-midi, ma délégation estime qu'une nouvelle approche, différente de celle qui a caractérisé les missions ordinaires des Nations Unies, à travers un déploiement accéléré, est indispensable afin que la mission pour l'action urgente contre Ebola puisse être à la hauteur des défis à relever. Deuxièmement, le renforcement des faibles capacités sanitaires locales des pays affectés, notamment à travers la formation du personnel médical local, la mise à disposition des centres de traitement mobiles, des hélicoptères, de véhicules, d'équipements de protection personnelle et du personnel médical qualifié. Troisièmement, une nouvelle approche de communication doit être utilisée, non seulement au niveau local, mais aussi au niveau mondial, en vue de mieux véhiculer les messages de sensibilisation. Aussi, nous insistons sur l'importance pour la mission de l'action urgente contre Ebola de disposer en son sein d'une forte composante communication qui œuvrera à sensibiliser davantage les populations locales sur les bonnes pratiques à adopter, mais également pour vaincre leur réticence à coopérer avec le personnel humanitaire. Quatrièmement, une aide budgétaire aux pays affectés, dont les économies sont durement éprouvées par l'épidémie, comme l'ont reconnu les institutions financières internationales. Pour prendre des mesures visant à arrêter la propagation du virus et à soigner les personnes infectées, les pays affectés ont été obligés de procéder à des dépenses qui n'étaient pas prévues dans leur budget. Les investissements dans plusieurs secteurs ont été tout simplement arrêtés. La Banque mondiale a estimé que la croissance économique dans les pays touchés par Ebola sera réduite de manière significative si l'épidémie n'était pas rapidement éradiquée. Madame la Présidente, afin de bénéficier des informations de première main et des éclairages utiles, ma délégation propose que le Conseil de sécurité invite, lors de sa prochaine réunion, certains médecins qui sont sur la ligne de front et qui sont les premiers intervenants dans les pays affectés. Madame la Présidente, l'heure des discours est révolue. Nous devons agir vite. Non seulement pour stopper la progression de la crise alimentaire et sanitaire et sauver des vies humaines pendant qu'il est temps, mais aussi et surtout pour préserver la stabilité et les acquis engrangés ces dernières années par les 3 principaux pays touchés par l'épidémie, notamment qui sont dans le cadre de la consolidation de paix et de la quiétude sociale. Pour réussir cela, Madame la Présidente, il faut isoler Ebola et non pas les pays affectés. Faut-il rappeler que ces 3 pays durement affectés sont encore inscrits à l'agenda de la Commission de consolidation de la paix des Nations Unies. Vous comprendrez donc l'urgence d'une riposte vigoureuse afin d'éradiquer cette effroyable épidémie qui sème la mort et la désolation tout en compromettant les acquis de nos États dans le cadre de la création d'un environnement de paix, de stabilité et de développement durable. Car il s'agit bien d'une question de sécurité collective qui appelle une approche globale et coordonnée. Pour terminer, Madame la Présidente, je voudrais réitérer la profonde gratitude de la Guinée, et plus particulièrement celle du Président de la République, Son Excellence Professeur Alpha Condé, à l'ensemble des partenaires pour leur soutien précieux, ainsi qu'aux vaillants personnels soignants qui s'investissent au quotidien pour enrayer l'épidémie, souvent au péril de leur vie. Je vous remercie.
Doy las gracias al representante de Guinea por su declaración. No hay más oradores inscritos en la lista. Invito ahora a los miembros del Consejo a celebrar consultas oficiosas para proseguir el examen del tema. Gracias. Se levanta la sesión.